Hello, welcome. In the previous lecture, we have discussed about what is risk and what is risk management. We have also understood there are two components involved in risk management. One is identifying a risk and another one is managing a risk. And this risk management is a continuous process. In this lecture, we will discuss in detail about identifying the risk. What are the various ways we can use to identify a risk in a project? Let us discuss them one by one. First thing is brainstorming. Team members discuss potential risks for each sprint during the planning session. When you are doing a planning for a sprint, you also discuss about the possible risks for that particular sprint. For example, during a sprint planning of an e-commerce project, team identifies the risk of surge traffic during a promotional event, potentially impacting the server performance. It means during a promotional event, there might be a surge in traffic. Your server should be able to handle that load. So you need to ensure that there are enough resources available. Another approach for identifying risk is retrospective reviews. We analyze the issues from the previous sprint to spot recurring risks and avoid repeating them. When you go through the risks that you have faced during a previous sprint, you will be able to identify the possible risks for the coming sprint as well. For example, a retrospective review reveals that sprint suffered a delay due to incomplete requirement documentation. It means you can follow up to get the updated document so that you can avoid that risk in the coming sprint. Another approach to identify risk is SWOT analysis. It means you identify strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Analyzing the project strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats to identify the potential risk areas. When you analyze the strength, weakness, opportunity, and a threat, you will be able to identify the potential risk areas. For example, during a SWOT analysis for a mobile app project, the team notes that adopting to a new programming framework could be weakness, posing a learning curve. When you adopt to a new programming language, there will be a learning curve. It can delay the project completion. Another approach for identifying a risk is using a risk checklist. Using a checklist of common agile risks such as requirement changes, resource availability, and technical challenges. For example, while using a risk checklist, team identifies dependency on a third-party payment gateway as a potential risk that could impact the transaction processing. Another approach is user story mapping. You break down the features of the project to understand in detail and identify the risk specific to each feature or a user story. When you break down the project into user stories, then you can identify the risk associated with each of these user stories properly. For example, when mapping out a user story for a file upload feature, team identifies the risk of potential security vulnerabilities related to large file uploads. Another approach is to identifying a risk is customer feedback. Collecting insight from the customer to catch the potential issues early, especially on features in active development. You keep getting the feedback from the customer, which will help you to identify the possible risk. For example, customer reports delay when using a beta feature of an application, prompting team to flag server response time as a risk to be managed. User is reporting a slowness in the application. So it means you need to look at the server capacity and the response. What exactly is causing this delay in the response? These are some of the risk identification approaches in an agile project. You do not need to memorize everything as it is, but you need to understand the approach for identifying the risk in an agile project. Risk can vary from project to project. You can add on more approaches as well based on the nature of the project. Based on the nature of the project, you can add on more risk identification approach as well. Maybe some of these approaches may not be suitable for a particular kind of project. Overall, you need to understand the concept of risk identification. That is the purpose of this lecture. Thank you for watching.